It's time to talk about religion again, and as usual I want to say up front that I'm not making this video to bait either Christian YouTube or atheist YouTube. I'm making it because this is on the British philosophy A-level syllabus. So, here we go. Part 1. Truth or Hare? There's a popular idea that religion is about believing certain things to be true. If you read a lot of atheist writers, or watch a lot of atheist YouTubers actually, they'll often talk about whether the central claims of religion are true and make sense, and apologists will argue back that they do. And that is absolutely valid and valuable discussion. Believing that certain things are true is a central part of a lot of what religion is about. People kill and die for dogma, and throughout history there have been long and bloody disputes about the supposed truth of very specific details. But what I'm going to be inviting you to today is the idea that religion is often about more than just supposedly true claims. One of the most famous analyses of religious statements came from Antony Flew with his parable of the gardener. Flew imagines two explorers who come to a garden in a jungle clearing. One says that there must be a gardener who maintains it, the other is skeptical. So they set a watch and they don't see a gardener. And the believer says, the gardener must be invisible. So they use bloodhounds, thermal cameras, tripwires, all kinds of methods of detection, and they never find a gardener. And every time the believer says, the gardener can't be smelled or seen on thermal cameras, but he is there. And eventually the skeptic says, look, if there's a gardener, but they're invisible and they can't be smelled and they can't be detected in any way, then how is that really different from what I'm saying, which is that there is no gardener? How is the world you're picturing really different from the one I'm picturing? And Flew's point is that religious claims can sometimes similarly be unfalsifiable. If no evidence can count against them, if they cannot be falsified, then surely, he says, they're just re-describing the same world that the atheist sees. Take the statement, God loves us. We can come up with a rough idea of what it would mean for a human being to love us, and if somebody said, I love you, we can think of evidence that would count for and against that idea. But God doesn't really prevent people from dying, doesn't really prevent suffering, and doesn't really prevent evil either. And yet, believers will still say, God loves us. But if no evidence can count against this idea, then how is God loves us really putting forward a vision of a different world from God doesn't love us? What is actually being said here? Now this is just an example, don't get too bogged down in it, but as you can see, Flew is looking at religious claims as if they are supposed to be true statements about the world. But the philosopher R.M. Hare has an interesting reply. He tells a story about a lunatic who is absolutely convinced that all university dons want to murder him. His friends try to introduce him to nice dons, and he says, no, they're just lying to lull me into a false sense of security. There's absolutely no evidence that can convince this guy. His belief is completely unfalsifiable. And so according to Flew, he's not really saying anything about university dons at all, because no matter what we tell him about them, his belief doesn't change. So what is he really saying? Hare says that what he's expressing is a blick, which is a word Hare made up. Blicks are not so much beliefs as they are ways of looking at the world. There's no evidence that can convince this guy, so his blick is more about assessing what does and doesn't count as evidence and what is worth paying attention to. As another example, take the idea everything that happens for a reason even if we don't know it. This is completely unfalsifiable. You couldn't begin to find evidence against this idea, or even I think for it actually, because it's completely consistent with anything happening or not happening. And yet, somebody who says this is looking at the world differently from somebody who doesn't say it. And that difference is what the idea of blicks tries to capture. Part 2. Life, finds a way. Now, you don't have to buy into the existence of blicks wholesale, but I think the general point that Hare's trying to make here is one that a lot of people have made, namely that there's more to religion than just believing things to be true. As an example, let's imagine that you are a member of the Russian Orthodox Church in the final years of the Russian Empire. When you go to church, there's the sound of bells and chanting. There's the smells of the incense, the candlelight flickering over the icons and the gold. The inside of Russian Orthodox churches are beautiful. You probably go with your whole family, and when you go, you pray for the souls of your ancestors who went to the Orthodox Church before you. So there's a real connection to family and tradition there. Maybe you're aware that the Bolshevik revolutionaries are very anti-religion, so when you go to church there might be some political sentiments mixed up in there as well. The prayers that you're saying are circular, chanted, almost meditative. There's so much more going on there than just turning up and saying, I believe that X, Y, and Z are true. The day-to-day experience of having faith is more than that. So much so that even the idea of Blix is kind of a dry way of looking at it. I've mentioned the theologian Mario Aguilar on the show before. He was one of my theology lecturers, and he advocates an approach to religion that he calls living theology. The idea is that, yeah, we can sit around and we can talk about the arguments and the logical nitty-gritty, but meanwhile, the church is an organisation with a lot of money and influence, and there are people who could use that church's help. So for people like him, the duty to help others is more pressing, and in particular the duty to politically help others. His approach comes from his own experience fighting against the Pinochet regime in Chile, which is something that his own faith and the Catholic Church in general played a not insignificant role in. His approach is that religion is something to be lived, not just thought about, and the political actions that religion can lead him and others like him to are still possible whilst the more theoretical questions are left unanswered. It's quite like an idea by the poet Rilke, who I've referenced on the show before as well, who advised young artists to live the questions, to be open to experiential ways of trying to figure something out, rather than just theoretical ones. Now, you might not like that approach at all, and you might, even if you do like it, say that it's not really appropriate in this case, which is totally fair enough, but we are now aware of that point of view, and so we have a greater understanding of the people who do think it's a good idea. Part 3. Madness! The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard tells a story about a madman who escapes from an asylum, and he realises that if he just says mad stuff, people will quickly figure out he's an escaped lunatic and they'll send him back. So he decides he's only going to say true, uncontroversial things. And when he goes into town, to everyone he meets, he says, "The world is round." That's all he says to anybody. And it's true, the world is round. But they quickly realise he's mad and lock him up. And what Kierkegaard was saying is that you can have all the facts and all the truths and still be wrong, because you haven't appreciated the context in which those facts matter. And the writer Sam Criss has said that sometimes certain popular atheist figures can be a little bit like Kierkegaard's madman, insisting only on what is true and missing the more contextual stuff. The philosopher Terry Eagleton said similar things. He says that when it comes to religion, if we're only assessing the truth claims and insisting on the debates and the rationality and the proofs, then we might not get very far. We know from psychology, and also, hey, from politics, that we can give people facts, but that might not always change their position, because people's positions are often more to do with how they interpret facts and what facts they care about. There is nobody for whom all facts are equally important. There is nobody for whom all information is equally valuable and action guiding. And to pretend that anybody is like that is to run the risk of being a little bit like Kierkegaard's madman. All of this is not to dismiss science or truth or any popular atheist talking points. I just wanted to teach this material with a bit of a different spin that I haven't seen on YouTube before. I'm not throwing truth out or disparaging the truth or being a Marxist, Illuminati, SJW cultural relativist, okay? I don't believe in the truth of any religion's central claims, and so I don't personally see the point for me of living those questions, but it's still cool to appreciate other people's viewpoints. And all I'm doing is inviting you to the idea that for people who have faith, there's more going on there. I'm sure YouTube will appreciate and understand the nuance of that position. I'll be interested to hear from people of all faiths and none in the comments. If you liked today's lesson, I have a tip jar at paypal.me/philosophytube. Think of it like me putting a hat round at the end of the lecture. Or if you can, make a monthly donation at patreon.com/philosophytube. That helps me keep making the show. And don't forget to subscribe.